Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining today's Hacking Exposed Think Beyond webinar. We are excited to get started. Before we do so, we just have a few housekeeping items we need to review. First of all, audio will sound best streamed through your computer. Please feel free to submit any questions via the Q&A box throughout the webinar. We will do our best to address them during the webinar or towards the end, and if not, we can reach out individually to make sure your questions are answered. If we have any additional resources, we will post those in the chat box, so please feel free to look at those. If we have time at the end, we will have a couple polling questions for you, so please answer them. We really appreciate your feedback so we can continue to make these webinars better and better every time. Links to this recording and presentation will be sent to you in the next few days, so keep your eyes on your email for that. And if you need any help throughout, you can reach out through the Q&A box, or you can contact us at webinars@cylance.com. And with that, Brian, you can take it away.
Great, thank you, Liz, and welcome everybody. As in the past, we have had Stuart McClure be kind of our host and MC of the meeting. Unfortunately, Stuart is out today dealing with some personal family issues. Everybody's okay, it's just he's just not available today. So unfortunately, you're going to be stuck with me, and I am Brian Robinson. I'm the Senior Director of Security Technology here at Cylance, and if you've been on Hacking Exposed or Cylance versus Hacking Exposed webinars or some other webinars, you probably would have seen my ugly mug and my video here. I'm going to start up so that you can see me, because I know Stu likes to be on camera when he does these things, so I want to try to do something similar. Now, I don't have a fancy office where you can see outside and everything. Behind him, I'm in a phone room locked in the hallway. So that's kind of what we're dealing with. But we do wish Stu and his family quick, speedy recoveries, and he'll be back on our next one. With me, I do have a special guest, and we're going to call him Evil Bob today. And Evil Bob is works in our research departments here at Cylance, and he kind of has to kind of protect himself. So there he is there. He's got that nice bright skin. So Evil Bob, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. So as you can tell by the accent, I'm not based in the States, and we don't get enough sun to give me that color skin right now. We are, yeah. So I've been at Cylance for a little under a year now, and a fair few years in the industry. But yeah, this is my first Hacking Exposed Live. Please be gentle, and yeah, Brian start the rest of it.
Absolutely, thanks. And so Evil Bob's going to be back on a little bit later. He is most likely very interested in the football match that just started right now in the World Cup. And so if we hear him screaming in the background, it's either because his team scored or they got scored on. So we'll go with that as we progress. But you know, we do love to involve different Cylancers from around the world. And so from time to time, you're going to see folks come in here from our different offices around the world to help us out. So let's go ahead and get started. And you know, one of the things that Stu likes to talk about when we do these Hacking Exposed is the concept of thinking beyond, and thinking beyond the traditional things that we have done in the past and have, you know, put in place to guard us in the past. And in fact, today we're going to show you some very simple techniques that are tools that are available to you in the real world. Most people would use a lot of these tools in like a red team or doing some sort of offensive testing versus defensive security testing. But you know, the concept here is to teach you some really simple techniques that you can utilize in your own environment to test against your own security products that you have deployed. So as Stu has said before, thinking beyond is thinking beyond the traditional layers upon layers upon layers of security that have been added in place, when in fact predictive prevention is actually possible And actually stopping these attacks before the code can execute is where you want to be. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as we talk about some of the issues with current endpoint security and even some of the network security in place that is in place today, and how some of those begin to have problems at some point. So the idea is to relook at what we're doing, not only from an attack standpoint, modernizing that and educating you on that, but also on the defense standpoint and making sure that our defenses are taking a prevention first approach. Prevent as much as possible out of the gate, and then you don't have as much to deal with and to have to fight with in the detect and respond areas. So today's agenda, again, we're going to show some methods, and we're going to start, and that's where my piece comes in, is I'm going to start with some very simple methods. And then we have Evil Bob, who's going to come in a little bit later and show us some pretty complex methods. And so we're going to kind of ratchet up the capabilities here to show you different ways and methods of bypassing traditional AV, endpoint security tools, et cetera, things like that. And then if we do have the time, we're gonna make sure that we leave enough time to talk about our one more thing, which is kind of cool because we're going to actually put a lot of these techniques together and actually do some live compromises. Now, again, I'll preface what we're doing today. This is all live code. We have a primary demo system, and then we have some backups as well. So if something happens and we have to switch over, please bear with us. We'll switch over as fast as we can. But we are running live things. So sometimes, when we're messing with live malware, chances are you might see something offensive on the screen. It's happened before in public settings. And so if something does happen like that, we're going to, as quickly as we can, get rid of things like that. But please be prepared for a little bit of dynamic capabilities here throughout our demo. So we're going to, again, start very simple, show you some simple things that you can do today to demonstrate how easy some of these things are to bypass or simple changes. And then we're going to get into some more complex methods. So why is it easy? And I kind of preface that, maybe I should have put it in quotes, but essentially it's relatively easy these days to bypass, especially a traditional AV type of product. And really it's because the security industry is built in a detect and respond model. I mean, now we have tools that are actually called detect and respond. If they require some sort of detection to happen, some sort of human intervention to determine that they're bad, and then the human can then respond. And the problem with that is that the scale that is there is simply not something that is manageable and maintained. So if we start by preventing as much as possible right out of the gate, and then only having to detect and respond to a tiny fraction of a percent, then we can get our scalability back. Now, the main problem is that endpoint tools are primarily based on signatures for prevention, and that goes back to the detect and respond. Somebody became a sacrificial lamb. And so if you, in this virtual room, but if you looked around this room at all the people that are sitting in this room right now, how many of you would raise your hand right now to be that sacrificial lamb and say, I'm going to sacrifice my network, my data, my intellectual property for the person sitting next to me? So that's a fundamental problem, right? It's a fundamental problem in how we design our security approaches today. These often require humans, or maybe they're using a little bit of artificial intelligence, machine learning to augment humans, but essentially humans are there to build, to do the reverse engineering, to do the research, to write the code, and it can become a problem, again, of scalability. And then once that vendor builds all those signatures and builds all that information, then they hand it to you, but it's your problem to get that out to all your endpoints. And I've been on site with some really large enterprise customers in my past where they were considering it a success, for example, if they were able to roll out a daily update after 5 business days to 85% of their network. And if you think about how fast some of these attacks are happening, that, that's really kind of a a problem in my opinion, but that's what they set up for success, because they know that with that existing infrastructure, they could actually get those updates out routinely in that type of model. So even network security is largely signature based. The worlds of network intrusion prevention, et cetera, are basically just signatures looking for specific types of things. And we're actually going to kind of show some of that today, and how, for example, we use Metasploit in a lot of these hacking exposed things. And if you use Metasploit in your internal, offense testing, you're going to find that a lot of products are going to block Metasploit, but they're blocking Metasploit because of the signature of the interpreters and things like that they have written to actually block that. And so we're going to hopefully show you some things soon that talk about tools that were actually built to get around those issues as well. Now, everybody says, well, if I keep people from downloading that bad file, then it's not going to be a problem, right? Well, again, the problem with URL and web security is it's pretty much the same model. It's based upon some person determining that that site is bad, it's compromised or whatever, and then you have to download those updates and get them deployed out to all of your endpoints before any of them will block that. And the major problem with that is by the time that actually happens, that site and that compromised site is gone. It's moved on someplace else. So again, you have a time constraint. Now, obviously, behavioral and heuristics, that was an okay layer that people added in after signatures began to fail, because they looked at the behavior of these things. The problem is with things like watching for behavior on ransomware or something else, is that many times, even before the files begin to be encrypted, backdoors are installed, rootkits are installed, or some other piece. So letting code run at all is really kind of a bad approach. And as I said before, if serious hackers are going to build their own tools to evade and bypass. And so today we're going to show you some things that are available for you to get and try in your own labs for free. You can get these tools. And as Liz said earlier, there's going to be a recording of this webinar that'll be out to you within a day or two, and you can pass this to your teams and look at it and even use these exact same techniques in your own network. And then we invite you to come back in 2 weeks from today to come back and learn. Basically, we're going to show you how Cylance defends and prevents these attacks from happening as well. So we'll let you play with them in your own labs for a couple of weeks if you want, and then come back and we're going to show you how we do with these different hacks as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into the meat of the presentation. And so I'm going to start with part of this. And as always with Hacking Exposed, I'll leave my camera on, but I'm going to be looking down here and typing and talking at the same time. So don't be offended if I'm not looking at you. And unfortunately, you're going to probably have to just kind of listen to my horrible voice and look at my bald head. So let's go ahead and get started. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with some very, very simple methods. We're going to start with using legitimate tools that actually have kind of legitimate purposes to change malware into something that is less recognizable. Now, our goal today is to be less recognizable, even though sometimes things will get picked up and detected. But, we're using freeware tools that are available for anybody. So a lot of the signature guys have built signatures that detect the usage of these freeware tools. And so, they're not detecting the malware, let's say, but they're actually just detecting that we're using something like Impress or UPX or whatever. So let's go ahead and get started. So again, what we're going to do here with our quick, simple demo is we're going to show you some of the issues with signatures and how they're built to kind of detect specific things in a file. And, even if a file is known by a multi-engine scanning site, for example, how we can actually change that file by simply a changing of one character, and it will actually create a unique file and force the engines to redo a scan or re-execute them in their sandboxes or whatever, even though the file hasn't really changed, but to force them to redo that. And then we're going to talk about something called crypting. And what crypting is doing is basically we're going to hide the malicious software inside of a legitimate application, and we're going to use a tool called Aegis Cryptor to do that. So with that, it'll take me just a second here, but we're basically going to flip over to our demo. Bear with me 1 second here while we get this done. Okay, so here is a system that we use in our little demo rig that I'm using as essentially our hacking box. So this is my red team box, if you will, my offensive testing security box, things like that. And what I've got is I've got some malware samples that I have curated. So by that, what I mean is that when I have, let's say, Cerber, for example, or I have WannaCry, for example, I know that these are, legitimate samples of this malware. So let's take Cerber, for example, and let's go grab a relatively new variant. So this was March of this year. And let's drag them over and put them on the desktop here. Now, what we're going to do to simulate or to show basically how the signature guys detect is we're going to use a site that's going to scan this file against multiple engines. And so we're just going to drag and drop this file to the site. And you can see here it's calculating the hash. And what it means basically by that is that this file has been scanned before. Obviously, we try to practice our webinars sometimes, but what you can see here is that this file has been scanned before. So it's a known quantity, it's a known entity, and it has 24 out of 35 detections that are able to detect it. So we can tell the site to analyze the file again, because with signature-based products, sometimes signatures get updated to include new malware, or what's kind of funny is in this case, it actually went down. So why would it go down? Why would less products detect it today than did 2 days ago or whatever when this file was scanned before? And the reason for that is that signatures can only be a finite size. So the vendor basically chooses on a daily basis, when you get those daily updates, what products or what pieces of malware they're going to defend you against. And so they usually have a concept of like the most popular malware in the wild today or something like that. So instead of downloading hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of megabytes per day of the signature database, they'll usually keep the full database in their cloud and then provide you on your local machines with a select few signatures. So sometimes you get new signatures, and sometimes they take signatures out to keep those updates as small as they can and still provide you with relative decent protection. So in this case, for example, we actually saw the detection get worse with today's signatures versus when this file was actually originally scanned. So like I said before, our goal here, I don't think we're going to be able to get this to 0 out of 35 detections with some of the freeware tools that we have available to us. And that's because, again, the signature guys have built signatures to detect the use of those tools like that. So let's go ahead and we're going to do a quick test here. And this one's kind of fun, but bear with me while I type and talk at the same time. But basically, we're going to use Impress. And if you're not familiar with Impress, this is a tool that's been around for a long time. It's a legitimate tool. It's not designed to make malicious software or evade security or anything. All it's going to do is it's going to compress this executable and delete some empty space that's in it. And essentially, it's designed so that it can make your exe more efficient and smaller for download. So, but it's going to change the original file to a point whereby the signature, the hash of that file is actually going to be different. So let's go ahead and Impress our Cerber example. And you can see that we did compress it a bit. We compressed it by significantly, a significant amount. And we have a backup of the original exe here if something happens and our our new exe doesn't work. But let's see what we did if we basically take this file and we do the same thing that we did with the original server example. Now, these results have been found before. As you saw there, it came up extremely quickly because obviously I've tested this before, and this is something that we show quite often. So it's a known file hash. Now, Impress is fairly consistent in that if you compress the same file with Impress over and over and over again, it's essentially going to create the same hash. Now, just by doing that, we can see that the score of this one has dropped from 23 out of 35 down to only 8 out of 35. Let's see if it can analyze it again, just to see if there are more or fewer detections from the last time that I scanned this file. No, still the same. Okay, so now what we can do is, this is a known file in the world. And so it's known to the different AV vendors that are out there. It's known to the different AV vendors that are on this site, for example. So let's create a unique file. And to do that, it's quite easy to do. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use a hex editor. And to create a unique file, I just need to make a change to the file that'll produce the output that'll give us a different hash value here. So what we're going to do, we're just going to simply open up our Impress packed version. And one of the things you're going to notice is that in this, you're going to see these clear text strings that are in this file. And, you know, as a signature author, I could write a signature that would look inside the file, and if it sees the word Impress, then it's an impressed file, and I could just say, oh, it's an impressed file, and therefore I'm going to flag it as bad. The problem with doing that is that Impress is a legitimate tool. There are reasons that you'd want to compress executables and do that with. So you could definitely create a false positive situation here if you wrote a signature that says anything that's impressed is bad. Now, we've seen some people do that. And in fact, if we were to look down here at the report here on some of the vendors that detected this, some of them will see the actual, you know, brand. Some of them will see, you know, the names of the signatures might be, you know, impressed files or packed or anything like that. So we want to create something unique. And all I'm going to do is come in here and change this capital E to a small e. And I'm going to save the file. Now, when I drag and drop this file onto this site, it has no previous results. So it actually has to upload it and scan it again. And as you can see here, the hash is entirely different. So that's how you can very, very easily change the hash of a file. Now, luckily, we still have the same detection rate, but we've created a unique file in the world that this site and its 35 engines did not know about and therefore had to rescan it. So you can see really easy how simple it is to create a unique sample that the AV products don't know about, and either force them to rescan again, force them to execute in a sandbox, reforce all that behavioral detection if it uses behavior to make the detection. And so that's a really quick way that you can do some of these very simple things and create essentially a zero-day sample of server that's running inside your environment that has a unique signature that's not known to the world. So it's a great way to test a simulation of a known piece of malware, but with a zero-day hash. Okay, now let's go to kind of part B of this. And we're not done with these samples yet. We're going to use these here in a few minutes. So we're going to take a look at some things. Let's use, we could do WannaCry. Oh, actually, we're going to use WannaCry a little bit later because it's always a fun one to use. Let's build a sample of ransomware. And what I'm going to use here is I have access to Tor browser on here, and I could go download, you know, ransomware from some of the ransomware as a service sites or whatever. But one of the cool things I like about this tool called Atom, this is also called Shark. Palo Alto did a great write-up on this a few years ago because this tool has been out since about 2015, I think, maybe even a little bit older. Its command and control is down, which is good. It's no longer on the dark web, but the tool, the EXE, can still be obtained. And this is simply a payload builder. So you can just come in here and let me see if I can remember my Bitcoin address. Yep, that's my Bitcoin address. Type in how much charge for your decryption. And like a lot of the ransomware as a service tools that are out there, you can pick the extensions you want to encrypt. You can do PDFs and JPGs, or you can do even wildcards. Like you can just encrypt everything on the system, and this will take a Windows box to its knees, which is pretty funny because it encrypts everything, EXEs, DLLs, it doesn't matter. But let's just focus this attack. So we're just going to encrypt PDFs only, and we can do a build. Now, we use Atom a lot. If you've ever been to any of our underworld tours or anything like that, we use Atom a lot. Now, the interesting thing is every time you build an Atom sample, it's a unique sample that is not known to the world. And so very quickly, we can just take this and upload this to the site. And you can see it. There weren't previous results. It had to upload it, and it's going to go through and scan it. And the cool thing is here, Atom's been out, like I said, since like 2015. So the signature guys have reverse engineered the Atom tool. So it knows how to detect different elements inside the Atom malware that it builds. So even though it has a unique hash, you still have a pretty high detection rate simply because this is a tool that's been out there for 3+ years. So you would hope that you would have a good detection rate on it. Now, another thing, if we did, let's do this one here. This one's kind of fun because this one is kind of scary. So DataKeeper is a ransomware as a service site that came out in February of this year, and you can go in there free of charge and compile new versions of DataKeeper and download them. And so I did this here a few days ago. And that file has already been scanned, and you can see here that some of these ransomware as a service tools that are out there are built to be fully undetectable. When you see things, when you go to a ransomware as a service site, like you pay $20, you can get a tool to make this FUD, F-U-D, fully undetectable. And that's where you get kind of scary when this tool has been out since February. And you bring them up here, and even something that is 2 or 3, this is a week old or whatever, but you can see that on the multi-engine site, it can pretty much it's designed to bypass those type of scanners. All right, so we had Atom, and this one's been scanned before, so we'll just pull up the results again. And so what we're going to do is simply we're going to use a cryptor to actually crypt this file. And so we're going to run this tool called Aegis Cryptor. Now, Aegis Cryptor has been out for a while, and it was updated pretty good through about mid last year. And then its command and control went down as well. So the tool is still available. Some parts of the website still exist. But a lot of the functionality is not available anymore, like building new stubs and things like that. You can't do anymore because the command and control is down. But if you look here at Aegis Cryptor, this is again a very simple tool. Now, this is a type of tool that there's no legitimate reason that you would build and crypt your EXE into this tool, because as you see here on the right-hand side, all of these checkboxes are essentially designed to evade AV. They're designed to evade sandboxes. They're designed to delay execution for periods of time to get past tools that look for malicious code, that kind of thing. So it's very easy to use this tool. You simply point it at your original sample. We'll point it to our original sample of Atom, and you select a stub. Now, we have stubs that we were able to build before the command and control went down, but even it comes with free stubs. And we're going to use a stub that was released in 2016 that they had available. So you get the free stubs when you install the tool. It downloads them and puts them in the system. So we're going to use a stub, and what a stub is a piece of code that looks legitimate, and then basically the malware is packed inside of that so that it's designed to make it look like a legitimate application. Now, the other thing we can do with Aegis is that this icon on this app does not look very inviting or trustworthy. So what we can do is we can make this thing look a little bit more trustworthy by simply going and giving it an icon. And in this example, we're going to make it look like Internet Explorer. Okay, and then we can even do things like we can, if you hover over it, it shows, for example, that it doesn't have a vendor and a bunch of other weird things. And so signature products sometimes will look at those different values. Okay. And we're just going to create this one. All right. Now, we have a new copy, and that new copy is sitting here, and it's got a new icon that looks a little bit more trustworthy. It's something that somebody, my grandma would probably click on if she were running Internet Explorer. And very quickly, we can upload this again to this site, and we can see that, we went from 20 some down to 9. And, you can see basically, different tools and different ways of detecting this capability. But again, a very simple way to make your file a unique hash in the world, which then causes, a lot of the AV products out there, if it doesn't have a signature or a hash for that specific file, it's going to do whatever it does in its next layer, allow it to execute, monitor it for bad behavior or whatever. And, with these two tools specifically, that's kind of a bad thing to do. Now, one of the things that happens when you start messing with malware isn't the highest quality code that's been written out there in the world. And so a lot of times this malware will actually break if you were to crypt it or if you were to impress pack it, for example. So I want to go over and we're going to just pop onto these victim systems before. If you've been on Hacking Exposed before or seen one of our demos, you've seen these victim systems. They're just victims with different files. And let's take our Impress packed version of Cerber that we made, and we changed the character in it. And let's execute it and see if it's still Cerber. So these will take a few seconds here. Oh yeah, that's Cerber. That's still going to be a bad thing. So as you can see, Cerber is good. Even though we used Impress and we changed its value, we still have a legitimate piece of malware that is able to impact a system. And then we're going to go over to our second victim here in just a second. And let's test our sample of Adam. And our encrypted version of Adam. Remember, we built Adam to only impact PDFs. So these PDFs here should be the ones that are So we should know within a few seconds. Oh yeah, icons changed. Oh, not good. And even if we come in here and we fix the extension, yeah, not good. Okay, so we've got legitimate samples of malware. Okay, now we're going to throw those victims away, let them reboot. They're non-persistent, so no Windows boxes were technically harmed in this demo. And then we're going to pop back into the deck real quick. Okay, so those are just a couple of ways that you can trick your antivirus into thinking that a new file has been dropped on your box, all that kind of good thing. And so now we're going to talk about a couple of different tools that are available. And we got to keep moving through this thing pretty fast. So I'm going to go through the next demo relatively quickly. But we're going to use a couple of different tools. I'm going to do a quick discussion around veil evasion. And now these tools are designed, again, for offensive security testing within your network, and they're made available. But the concept here is to inject code directly into memory with not by using malicious software, because as you saw before, we were able to make unique samples of those pieces of malware, but they were still detected on, you know, a few percentage of the systems that are out there. So your initial vector, a lot of times you don't necessarily want it to be a copy of WannaCry. You want to come in with something that is maybe fileless or script-based or a non-malicious exe that you can trick somebody into running, and then that will create the command and control backdoor that you then need to then go do what you're going to do. So I'm going to talk real quick about veil evasion. We're going to do a quick demo of that, and then we're going to come back and I'll hand it over to Evil Bob, who's going to take us through Shelter. So bear with me a moment again. We're going to flip back over, and I do need to bring back up my victim boxes. So just give me a second here while I bring these new versions of our victims back up. Okay. Now, while those are coming back up, because we're going to need those here in a minute, I'm going to use victim 1, and then Evil Bob here is going to use victim 2. We're going to pop back over to our hack box here, and we're going to use, we're going to set up veil. And, oops, did I type it wrong? I fat fingered it, apologize. All right. So this is a Kali Linux box. A Kali Linux box is, if you're not familiar with it, again, it's a tool designed for testing, to do your own red team testing, to your own vulnerability assessments, your own security assessments. And basically, it includes a whole bunch of tools like Veil Framework. It includes things like Metasploit and a bunch of other things. So basically, what we're going to do here is we're going to build a Metasploit reverse TCP interpreter. So we're going to open a reverse shell to one of our victim systems, and we're going to take control over it from remote. But we're going to use something that isn't malicious to do that with for the initial vector. Once we have control, we can either use it to live off the land and spread throughout the network, or we can then use that command and control interface to then upload something malicious and then actually ransom the box. So what we're going to do here is we're going to build using Veil Evasion. And if you want, I mean, the website's right there, visit Veil Framework. Very cool tool. It's designed basically to get around traditional AV, because the exe that it builds is actually not malicious. It's simply, you know, script code, shell code, Python, PowerShell, whatever you want. But it is something that basically, you know, gives you the ability to create these things and build these things into a non-malicious exe. So as you can see here, it has a ton of different types of things that it can do. We are going to use 28, which is we're going to build a reverse TCP interpreter into this. And then, as you can see here, it's got most of the variables all set. The only thing it needs really is the IP address of the box that I'm running on here. So we're going to go ahead and enter in the IP address of this box, and we're going to generate. And let's call it awesome. Okay, so now it says, you know, what type of installer or what type of exe do you want to use? We're just going to go ahead and use the default. So we're going to generate this cool thing. And now this gives us the ability right here to even check whether our payload exists in some of the more popular multi-scanning sites. We can type in here, you know, check VT, for example. Oh, not found in VT. So we've created a file that has a unique hash that we're going to be able to use. So now we're going to quit out of Veil, and we're just going to copy this file over to our victim system. And so I'm going to copy it by hand, but again, so yep, there's awesome exe. So we're just going to copy it over. Bear with me for a second here. All right, we're going to put this bad boy. All right, Now we've copied that over to the file server that will have access to the environment. And now we're going to set up our Metasploit console so we can catch this session once it starts, and then take remote control over the victim. So again, the victim could get this exe any number of ways. They could get it from a drive-by website. They could get it from you know, a malicious attached email. We could build this into a macro script or whatever we want to do. But this makes it pretty easy. We'll just do this quickly with an exe. So all I'm doing right now is basically, is setting up Metasploit to create a listener that, as you can see, we're using pretty much the same IP and port number that was in the package that we built using Veil. My fingers and brain aren't working together today very well. Okay, now let's go ahead and create a listener. So now it's going to basically listen for a connection from our victim. And our victims should be back up and running now. So here we have our victim one again. Again, we've got our sample files, all that stuff. Everything's good here. Let's go ahead and run something like calculator. So we've got some programs that are running on here. Now, again, like I said before, we could get this awesome exe from anywhere over here, however we do it, but we trick our user into executing it, or even we stick a USB stick in a machine, in a kiosk or whatever, we execute it ourselves, or an auto run or something like that. But basically, it's a benign thing, and when you double click on it and run in the background, you're not going to see anything. The user isn't going to see anything. However, on the command and control side, you're going to start seeing that a session has been opened. And we can actually begin to interact with this now. For example, I'm sitting on the desktop, so I can actually look at the files that are on the desktop. I can take a look at what user I am logged in as. That's cool, but hey, let's get some more privileges. Let's see if we can get system. So this is actually exploiting the system, and now I'm not running as a user anymore. Anything that I do is running actually as system permissions. And I can do things like, oh, I noticed that they're running calc on it. So we're going to kill calc. And if we pop back over here to our victim, you'll notice calculator exe is gone. It's not there anymore. That's kind of fun. Another thing we can do while we have this box for a few seconds here is we can, let's start a keylogger. Awesome. All right, now let's come back over to our victim. Let's say I'm going to work on my resume. So I'll pop open my resume. And I'll just come down here. Let's say job title. Let's go, I can see everything you type. Typo. All right, let's go back over to worker and dump out the key. Look at there. Even with the typo, it still captured it. So very simply, you're able to do this and create these things. And again, Veil is something that is designed to evade AV, but it is a known tool. So if we take a look at this exe, again, it's a unique one. So it has to upload it and it has to rescan it and all that other stuff. So it's a unique file in the world, but it should get detected by a few of the vendors that are out there, and they're going to detect it as, generic, Veil, Python, that's kind of cool. But nobody saw, for example, Metasploit built into that. So there's a couple different ways using some tools that you can do that. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip back real quick and turn the conversation back over to Evil Bob, who is going to talk about the next tool that we're going to use. Evil Bob, are you there?
I am, and for those wondering, it is still 0-0 in the football or soccer if you are in America. So Shelter, the tools we've looked at so far, we are taking either known malicious samples, and we are trying to obfuscate what it is they do, either by encrypting them or by packing them. With Veil, what we've done is introduce shellcode into a binary. So this is extra code alongside that binary, which basically gives a foothold on that system to the attacker. So shellcode is just a small piece of code that sits in memory and acts as our foothold. So Shelter looks quite similar to Veil in what it does, but the way it does it, and I'm going to fully get my geek on now, is way cool. It's difficult to explain how Shelter works. So it basically, you give it a 32-bit binary, only works on 32-bit binaries at the moment. They have to be standalone binaries, so not reliant on anything else, not an MSI or anything like that. So you're looking for an executable. And what it will do is it will debug that file inside of Shelter, and it will follow the execution of that program. And what it's looking for is it's looking for the commands and the data that makes up that compiled code. It wants to see how it runs and where it runs and what it does. And what it's going to do is it's going to alter the entry point of that application. And what this means is it can get the application to write into memory the shellcode that you choose, but without changing the binary itself except for that entry point. So you don't have code caves, you don't have extra resource files, you don't have anything that a signature can rely on in that respect. You have to know what it is this is trying to do. It also allows you, one of the coolest things, and we'll show you in a second, is that it allows you the ability to maintain that application's actual function. So we'll show you shortly with a security tool that some guys you might have seen in the past. The closest thing I can think of it comparing it to is like rock chaining. For those of you are familiar with rock chains, return-oriented programming, that's a method that you see in exploitation, where if you find a vulnerable application, you can have a look at how that application runs and create a sequence of events in that process's execution in order to write shellcode into memory. But Shelter is just way stealthy. It sounds like magic, it acts like magic, it's doing some way complicated stuff. So you think it might be quite difficult to run. It's not, it's awesome. So what we're going to quickly do first off is jump over to the worker desktop environment. So I will use, in fact, we background this.
You can just kill that too if you'd like.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to log? Can you just log me back into another Kali box? Sorry, we've got an issue. I'm using Brian's session, but the keyboard mappings from the UK to the US don't work very well for some of the special characters. So.
Yep. What am I doing? Well, maybe.
Maybe not. we should be able to run it on this other one anyway. So. You just need to do sessions. Yeah. Cool.
Let's do that real fast, and we'll get that box back.
No worries. I'll carry on with the Shelter. We'll build the executable first. So what you want to do, as we said before, is you need a 32-bit executable. So what we're going to do is go and grab a fairly well-known one, if Chrome comes up. Is it going? There we go. So I am way less practiced at typing and talking than Brian, so you might hear some silences whilst I am actually typing. So we're going to use one of the sysinternals tools, Auto Runs. Awesome tool, used and loved by forensics people everywhere. And we are going to take a copy. Oh, you can see I already downloaded it once today. Okay, WinRAR. And we're going to take Auto Runs and just drop it on the desktop there. So Auto Runs is a standalone 32-bit executable. That's everything we needed. So Shelter is this dynamic analysis tool that's going to repurpose this valid executable into writing some shellcode onto the target system. So how do you want to use this? Well, you can either use automated mode, which it will give you a list of predefined shellcodes. So we're going to use this with interpreter, but it can also debug and say, here's an entry point. Do you want to use this one? So you can create your own shellcode. If you have the time and the experience, I highly recommend doing that, because you're not going to run into some of the indicators that Brian was talking about earlier, some of the signatures that he was talking about earlier. So we're going to go with automated. Do you want to check and see if there's a new version? We only just downloaded this one, so we're good. So what is the target executable? It is auto runs. Okay, so now auto runs, you can run it on Windows as we are here. It'll also run on Linux inside of inside of Wine even. If you're running it on Windows, it will allow execution for 30 seconds, and it's tracing, you can see here at the top, it's tracing the instructions over that first 30 seconds of execution. If you're running it Linux, because it's slightly slower, it'll run for 60 seconds. But this is going to give Shelter an idea of those entry points that will allow it to change the behavior of the application, change the flow of the application. So when this hits 30 seconds, we should get a little message. Cool. So enable stealth mode. Now this is the bit, if you say yes at this point, stealth mode is what will allow the application to work following your injection of shellcode into the system. So it'll run as auto runs afterwards. So Brian before used reverse TCP. There might be signatures for reverse TCP interpreter connection. So maybe try mixing that up as well. So we're going to go with reverse HTTPS in this instance. Oh, sorry. You have to say, I want to use a listed one, and then I want to use number 3 from the menu. So set L host, and I'm using we're going to go for our Kali box. What port should we use? We'll go for a poker hand. Cool. So now it's going to go off and do its stuff. And it's going to say verified. Awesome. So we can continue out of that. So this now is our malicious version. So Brian, do you want to just start a couple of Kali sessions for me, please? Many thanks. And we've made it to half time, England, Belgium. It's still 0-0. Oh, what's going on with the box? Hey, we go. We've got one. I've seen some questions coming in. I hope the answers are going okay for you guys. We are trying to keep on top of them. Okay, so now we have 2 Kali sessions. First one, come back to that. So what we're going to use is Metasploit again. So MSF console -Q. So the -Q, all that means is it's going to start quietly. I'm going to try and race through this so we can finish at the top of the hour. Because we've got another one after this if we get a chance. Okay, and we're going to use exploit -multi. And I hope I've spelled all that right. Awesome. So we've got that running now. So if I just upload this, did that run? Cool. And I'm going to switch over to our victim number 2, which is our nice clean box, and take our malware samples, B. Roberson, and auto runs. So auto runs, you double click it, it looks like it's running, you click agree, it's running, it's doing its thing. So to the user, they wouldn't maybe suspect at this point that anything malicious is happening. However, back on worker, we have a session. So So as you can see, we'll take a screenshot of there. Because this is on a different box. In fact, we've got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to leave it there. I hope that's okay for you guys. So you can see that we have that session's come back to Meterpreter. We have that foothold in the environment now. So those have all been ways in which you can use different tools in either to crypt them or to add shellcode or to modify the flow of an application. Now, the next part we're going to get into is we got to pay props to Dave Kennedy from Trusted Sec for creating Trevor, #TrevorForget, which is an awesome little tool. He basically got frustrated. Oh, sorry, there's a slide. I see, I'm new to this whole presenting type of stuff. One more thing.
Yeah, so we're gonna go to the one more thing, which is gonna put it all together and give you guys an idea of what's happening. So go ahead, Evil Bob.
So yeah, Dave Kennedy, Trusted Sec. Part of the license agreements, if you ever use or talk about Trevor C2, you must give him a hug. If you ever see him at a bar, the hug must last 5 seconds, and buy him a beer. He does reserve the right to refuse both. But that is actually written into the license agreement. So what Dave was getting, and the guys at Trusted Sec were getting frustrated with, was the fact that Meterpreter was getting tagged and signatures for Meterpreter were being more prevalent. So they might have a bypass and it'd last for a week and then it would get canned again. And they'd come up with another bypass and they were spending more and more time working on the bypasses than what they should actually be doing. So what they decided to do, and what many attackers might decide to do, is write your own. Dave wrote Trevor. Trevor works in a different way to Meterpreter in the way that it passes communication around. It actually clones a website, and then that's the server side of things. And on the server side, it can drop communications onto that website. The client on the victim machine will poll that website, and any traffic from a network detection point of view is going to look like legitimate requests out to a website and legitimate responses from that website. So it is hiding in plain sight. So we'll quickly get into it now because I know we are short on time. So is a little more involved in this one. So what we'll do is we created a website for this, like a malicious website. In the wild, this might be someone who has maybe taken control of a WordPress site or something along those lines. That's how this could be recreated in the wild. So all I'm going to do is just create a little web server running on port 8080 on this box. And we're going to kick off Trevor over here as well. Now, Trevor, have we got enough time? So Trevor, I'll tell you what I'll do. So the Trevor server has some configuration that you're going to need to sort out. So in here, config constants, which website do you want it to clone? So in our case, it's going to clone the website that we have written that is going to be running on this box. There is also one thing a bit further down. All of these can be changed, which means those signatures that are written, these are all fields that could be changed if you wanted to change them. And that helps in bypassing some things, because if one bit gets known, that might be the bit that the AV or your network devices key into. The other thing is the cipher here. So that cipher is the standard cipher that comes shipped with Trevor. What you need to do is make sure that this in the server side and the corresponding one on the client side match up to get that communication working. So we're going to exit that. We are going to quickly run Trevor. So as you can see here, Trevor is cloning the website. It's done that. It's starting to C2. Awesome. We are going to quickly jump back over. I'm conscious that I'm saying quickly a lot. I'm sorry about that. We're going to run.
It's all right. Take your time. If people do have to leave, again, we'll have the recording out. So if you do have a hard stop, we'll have a recording out shortly for you. If you're more than welcome to stay and see these things actually happen. So go ahead, Evil Bob.
I will slow down slightly then. So what we've got here is what could be a malicious website. Like I said before, this could be a WordPress site that has been owned in the past by someone else and is serving up malicious content. In this case, you go to the website and it says, it has been detected that you need an important security update. Oh. So you go on here and click the security update. Yep, they can be harmful, but website says I need it, so I need it. Security update is even says here that it's something I need. Basically, it's a batch file, and in that batch file, I can show you. All it's doing is running a PowerShell one-liner. Where have we gone? I did it. Yeah. So it's a PowerShell one-liner that we've seen in numerous attacks, and it's basically saying go back up to the website and grab updater1.ps1. All we've done is rename the Trevor client to updater.ps1. Trevor ships with this PowerShell client, so it's easy to put in play. If you didn't want to go through the rigmarole of setting up your own website to do this and make it look like we have, you can just run this PowerShell script and it does exactly the same thing as we're doing now. So we have run the bat file, and you can see over here in Trevor that we have a connection back. So this is similar in sort of theory, I guess, to Meterpreter. It's a bit more limited in that what it's going to give you is access to basically to the command prompt on your victim machine. So some of the basic commands you can list, that'll say who has access and what number you're on, and then you can interact. So I'm going to interact with the first session we have. So it's dropping you onto the shell. So now we're over here, we can maybe hit dir, and this is going to put a little bit of background. So the way Trevor works, that Trevor server is basically stood up on, so in this bit, has stood up its own website running in Apache. And as part of that website, it has a base64 encoded string in there, which the client is going to, every now and then is going to go and pull back and have a look at that website and see if it has any new data to retrieve. And if it does, it will execute that command, and then it will send a GET request back to Trevor in order for Trevor to display that information back to you here. So it's quite a cool little way of doing it. It's not a stateful connection because it's relying on the website to do this thing. So it's like asymmetrical in that a message gets left. It's like the old spy movies when you've got like the Russian dude somewhere in London leaves a bag on the floor next to a park bench, and then someone else comes along and picks up that bag and they read what they have to do next. It's the same idea. They're like a dead drop, is how Trevor's working in this instance. So if we now go back over to, so yeah, we can see that that's over here. In order to get around some of the maybe other controls, is that the one I should be on? Is that victim 1, victim 2? So to get around those controls, like I said before, that those two cipher blocks, one in the server, one in the client, those both need to match up. And the reason they need to match up is that base64 encoded string is actually encrypted with those ciphers, so that even if you have network detection stuff that can decode that base64 stuff, it's still not going to know what's underneath it unless it has that cipher, not cipher, that decryption string. So just to show that, we'll quickly run Wireshark. And we're only worried about communications to and from our Kali box, and we're only worried about it over port 80. So even if you are running on port 80, everything is in clear text, your network devices, or maybe even your HIDs, like your host-based detection services, they might not be able to see this as it's going backwards and forwards without that key. So what I'll do is I'll send over another command. And here, we just pause that. You can see here, this block here is the base64 command that the Trevor client is looking for. So it will take this down, decode the base64, and then decrypt with the cipher that it has. But even if, I mean, we can take this now and take it into a base64, just need an equals at the end. We can take it to a base64 decoder online, and you can see that even decoded, it makes no sense. So you get something that looks base64 decoded again. You can take that again. And still no dice. It doesn't like what it's seeing. So it's a really cool way of hiding in plain sight. And the idea of the dead drop works really well. So you think, okay, so you have a foothold, but you only have basic access. What can you really do with basic access? Well, you can get a lot of information. So even just as a user on the domain, you can grab certain information. So if we do netgroup /domain, and we can find out what the name of the domain is that we're even running on. Oh, did I do something? Hang on. Evil Bob goes and has a look at Red Team Handbook because he always forgets these sort of things. NetView. So you can see workgroup, test for yourself. If you wanted to know, sorry, this is just due to a limitation in, I don't, my keyboard, I don't have the double quote sign anymore, just because of the way the mapping works. So I have to copy one from over there to use. So you can also see who is in the domain admins group. So you can see we've got administrator, B worker, and Joe worker. So these are, you can get loads of information. Now what you can do is you say, well, if there's an administrator there, maybe I have the administrator running on this box. And then you can also do things like grab things. So certutil is a built-in tool, a trusted tool within Microsoft, which you can tell to go out and get things from the internet. So in this case, we're going to go and get some malware. However, you could go and get a PowerShell version of Mimikatz, or you could go and get a, if you know with vulnerabilities, you know the build on the system, maybe you can go and get an exploit for something. You can use that for privilege escalation. So there's masses. Just saying you have like a user foothold isn't really saying you don't have a lot that you can do in the environment. It's huge. Like this is the first point, and this is where, if things have happened, this is where you want them to stop them right now, really quickly. So for this last part of the demo, we'll go and get a file from our website. Just check I've got no. So you can see over here, this bit updated because a request came in. So it's gone off, it's got this batch file. So now if we go back over to that, our victim machine, have a look in downloads, you can see second.bat has come down. Brilliant. How do you run second.bat? Well, you can just go into Trevor and type in the path for second.bat. You know it's going to go into the downloads files. That's your name, isn't it? Yep. And execute that file. So now what that bat file is going to do, I think that'll be working. What that bat file is going to do is it's going to grab a copy of WannaCry. It's going to put it onto the system. You can see the backgrounds change color. You're going to see the ticky timer in a second. So even though you have just a basic user account, even you can do your recon, you can find out some information, and then you can kill the system on your way out to make it even more difficult for people to find what you might have been doing in there. There you go. WannaCry has been pushed onto the system. So I know that was really, really quite rushed, but Trevor is an amazing little tool. It's really lightweight, and the ways in which you configure the settings within it will give you really nice way of trying to evade those signatures that might be in not just your endpoint antivirus, but also in your network stuff as well. And if you do have the skills, I mean, these guys at Trusted Sec, they have the skills and they wrote their own command and control malware. If you have the skills in-house, you write your own, it probably won't get detected by AV products. And the reason for that is because it's not been seen before. Relying on what has been seen before is it's just flawed. So I will hand it back over to Brian. I hope that's okay. And update on the score, England are now losing 1-0 to Belgium. So since I've been talking, obviously me talking is bad luck for our national team.
Oh, that's too bad, man. Awesome. Thank you so much. And apologize, folks. We are running a little bit over, but we'll get back and get this thing flushed out. I really appreciate you hanging out with us today. Evil Bob talking about, how these things can be put together in the real world. And so I do want to leave you with a few countermeasures. And because we like to show these things, but we also like to give you a path forward. And really the point that Stuart and I wanted to get across during this webinar today is that, there's a lot of solutions out there that say they have AI, where they're talking about AI as a feature that they're adding to their existing product lines, or they're using AI to build new signatures, to augment humans, things like that. But AI is not a simple feature. AI is the future of the way to defend against these things. We actually have to get to where we can predict these types of things actually happening on the endpoint before the code executes. Right? You saw early on we were able to remove, from an 80%, 90% detection rate down to like a 10% detection rate or 20% detection rate from the traditional AV. So yes, Evil Bob used a copy of WannaCry, but we could have used some of those other techniques to make that copy of WannaCry less known to the AV world, and therefore have a much higher chance of success with a known tool. So, detecting and responding to these things. I mean, you saw Evil Bob talk about Trevor C2, which is using, he didn't fire up an HTTPS server. It's not encrypted. So your traditional network security would have visibility into those commands. But as he showed, if you don't have that base64 decryption key in your sensor, you're not going to be able to get that, you're not going to be able to look at those commands. So it was designed to look, even if it's running in clear text, it looks like legitimate poll traffic between a website and a user. So things like detecting strings and things like that, it's not going to happen. It's not going to be able to stop those kind of things. And again, detecting and responding, it's not scalable. I mean, just look at the numbers. Traditional AV, out there being able to detect 50 to 60% of, unknown new malware that comes out 0 days. When WannaCry hit, most of the companies out there had to do data upgrades. And NotPetya hit, everybody had to do data upgrades. Those take time. And so in the world where you've got that type of AV, you're leaving yourself, 50% or a little bit less for the detect and respond, for the humans to look at these things and determine if they're bad. Whereas if you play the numbers game, again, you move to an AV that's based on AI like Cylance, you're looking at a greater than 99% detection rate on 0-day unknown malware. And so you're left with a small fraction that you have to use humans to detect and respond with. So this requires looking at your security strategy from a prevention first model, not from a detect and respond and react after the breach has occurred. Now, there are players in the in the AI AV space, essentially. Obviously, there's us at Cylance. There's Endgame has a decent product that's out there, and Invincia used to be relatively cool, but after their purchase by Sophos has kind of lost a lot of its capabilities. So again, like we said before, we're going to come back in 2 Thursdays from now when we're going to show you what Cylance looks like versus these types of attacks and what things that you can do. And we're running out of time, and I think we've been trying to answer the questions in line. So we're just going to go ahead and I think we're probably just going to go ahead and skip our polling questions. But thank you so much for hanging out. I do apologize we went 15 minutes over, but hopefully you've got what you need to be able to maybe go back and try some of these things on your network, try them with some of your security tools, and get some results. And then again, come back and hang out with Stuart and myself and Evil Bob in 2 weeks for our companion webinar where we have Cylance versus these Hacking Exposed. So thank you very much. Have a fantastic day. We really appreciate you taking the time and a little extra time to hang out, and take care, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.